Imagine being just 7 years old when your destiny is sealed, not by choice but by blood, by honor, by oath, a wooden sword in your hands, a real war looming in your future. This was the path of a knight. In the Middle Ages, knighthood wasn't a title one simply inherited. It was a grueling journey forged through discipline, obedience, and relentless trial. The boy who would one day wear steel began as a page, serving noble lords, learning courtly manners, and listening to tales of battle around the fire. His toys were blades, his books filled with saints and chivalry. Noble birth granted the opportunity, but not the guarantee. Even the sons of lords could fail. From early childhood, they were sent to live in other noble households to be hardened, mentally and physically. They ran errands, cleaned armor, and fetched weapons for real warriors. They watched, they imitated, and slowly, the fire of knighthood began to smolder in their hearts. But this was only the beginning. Before a boy could ride into battle with a banner of his own, he would need to endure training that broke many, and forge a code that would define him for life. Before he could dream of steel armor or noble steeds, a knight began life in service, as a page. At just 7 years old, a noble boy was sent away from home to live in another lord's household. There, he began his training in humility, discipline, and duty. The day started at dawn. Pages rose early to attend morning prayers and deliver messages. Their tasks seemed small, cleaning weapons, tending the fire, assisting at feasts. Yet, each was a lesson. Every sword polished was a chance to learn its weight. Every order obeyed, a practice in loyalty. Pages studied more than just chores. They learned to read and write, often in Latin. They were taught the songs of minstrels, the legends of saints, and the tales of King Arthur. A page needed to understand both books and battle. Physical training was constant. Pages wrestled, ran, and learned to handle small swords and wooden shields. Horse riding became second nature. Play turned into preparation. Under the watchful eye of knights and ladies, pages were shaped day by day, not only into warriors, but into noblemen of honor and poise. At around 14, a page who had proven himself worthy was elevated to the rank of squire, a turning point in the path to knighthood. With it came new responsibilities, harsher training, and the first real taste of the battlefield. A squire was assigned to serve a specific knight. He became that knight's shadow, dressing him for battle, caring for his weapons, feeding and grooming his horse, and studying every move. He learned through watching, mimicking, and enduring. His physical training intensified. Swordsmanship became daily routine. He practiced with blunted weapons in the yard, endured bruises from jousting dummies, and trained to fight on horseback. He also learned the deadly art of the lance and how to wear and fight in armor that could weigh over 50 pounds. But a squire's education wasn't all blood and steel. He studied heraldry, courtly manners, and even music. He learned how to speak properly in court and how to conduct himself with dignity. Most important of all, a squire was expected to begin living by the code of chivalry. Loyalty, courage, and humility were no longer ideas. They were now expectations. Knighthood wasn't just about strength or swordplay. It was built upon a sacred code, chivalry. This unwritten law guided every action of a knight, shaping not just how he fought, but how he lived. At its core, chivalry demanded loyalty to one's lord, bravery in the face of danger, and unwavering faith in God. But it also required compassion toward the weak, the poor, and especially women. A true knight was as gentle in peace as he was fierce in war. Squires were taught these values daily. They listened to tales of heroic knights who defended pilgrims, rescued maidens, and stood firm against overwhelming odds. These stories weren't just bedtime tales, they were blueprints for a life of honor. Living by the code wasn't easy. Knights were human, tempted by pride, greed, and rage. But chivalry demanded restraint. A knight was to protect the innocent, keep his word, and never strike a man who was unarmed or surrendered. It was an ideal, often unreachable, but it gave knights a goal higher than mere victory. To live with honor, even when the world did not. A knight without his horse was half a warrior. Mounted combat was the very heart of knighthood, and squires spent years forging a bond with their steed, built on trust, skill, and relentless practice. Training began with the basics: grooming, saddling, feeding. A squire didn't just ride, he cared for the horse like a brother. Understanding the animal's moods and limits was essential. In battle, hesitation or panic could be fatal, for both. Next came riding at speed, learning to guide the horse with knees and voice, leaving hands free for weapons. Squires practiced drawing swords and aiming lances while galloping across open fields. balance and coordination became instinct. Then came the training in mounted combat. Jousting dummies spun on poles, daring squires to strike their mark. They charged with lances under the watchful eye of their knight, learning the weight of armor, the power of momentum, and the danger of falling. These warhorses, called destriers, were bred for strength and ferocity. They weren't just mounts, they were weapons, trained to trample and charge without fear. To command such a beast was no easy feat, but for a true knight, mastery of the horse was not optional, it was destiny. The thunder of hooves, the shimmer of polished armor, the lance lowered, the target fixed. Jousting was no mere sport, it was the battlefield in miniature, a proving ground for squires and knights alike. Jousting tournaments were grand events filled with pageantry, music, and roaring crowds, but behind the glory was a brutal test of precision, courage, and control. Two riders charged each other at full speed, aiming to strike with the tip of a wooden lance and unseat the other without breaking formation. For a squire, learning to joust was a rite of passage. He practiced for months, aiming at the quintain, a rotating arm with a shield on one side and a sandbag on the other. A missed strike meant the sandbag spun around and knocked him off balance. Lances were carefully balanced. Shields had to be held firm under the shock of impact. Timing, posture, and composure were everything. Victory wasn't just about hitting hard, it was about grace under pressure. A clean strike won honor. A fall taught humility. To become a knight was to be encased in metal. Armor wasn't just protection. It was a second skin, crafted to move with the body while shielding it from death. But wearing it wasn't easy. It had to be earned. At first, a squire learned to wear simple chainmail, or hauberk, made of thousands of interlocked rings. It was heavy, hot, and unforgiving, but it taught resilience. Beneath it, thick padding soaked up impact and sweat alike. Later came the plate armor, pieces of steel molded to limbs, chest, and face. It could weigh 45 to 60 pounds, yet a trained man could fight, run, even mount a horse in it. Squires spent hours learning to move naturally while wearing it, performing drills again and again until they could fight as though the armor wasn't there. Each piece had purpose. The gauntlets for grip, the helm for vision and breath, the greaves for deflecting sword blows. Adjusting straps, maintaining hinges, oiling joints. Squires had to know their armor like a craftsman knew his tools. In war, it saved lives. In tournaments, it prevented death. And in ceremony, it symbolized nobility, power, and readiness. In a sea of armored men, how did one know friend from foe? The answer lay in heraldry, a knight's visual signature, painted on shields, surcoats, and banners. Every color, symbol, and shape told a story of lineage, honor, and identity. Squires were taught to read these symbols as carefully as they read scripture. A red field might signify courage, while a lion represented strength. Each family had its own coat of arms, passed down through generations, altered only with royal permission. Designing and understanding heraldry was a vital skill. It wasn't just decoration, it was a declaration. On the battlefield, a knight's colors struck fear in enemies or rallied allies. In tournaments, a well-known crest could bring prestige or challenge. Squires memorized the crests of noble houses, learned the rules of heraldic design, and even practiced painting them. Mistaking a crest in war could mean disaster. When a knight rode with his banner unfurled, he carried more than a name. He carried the honor of his bloodline, the story of his people, and the weight of every oath he'd sworn. A knight was not only a warrior, he was expected to be a man of elegance, virtue, and refined behavior. Strength alone could win battles, but it was courtesy that won loyalty, respect, and love. As a squire, one's education extended beyond weapons and war. In the great halls of castles, squires learned the art of noble conduct. They were taught how to bow, speak with deference, serve wine gracefully, and address lords and ladies with the utmost respect. This training wasn't for show, it reflected the values of chivalry. A true knight was to be as gentle at court as he was fierce in battle. He was expected to protect the dignity of women, to resolve disputes honorably, and to carry himself with pride, not arrogance. Music, poetry, and dance were also part of his schooling. Squires listened to troubadours, learned verses by heart, and even practiced playing instruments like the lute or harp. Refinement was seen as strength, not weakness. Knighthood was as much a spiritual calling as it was a martial one. A knight was not only a servant of his lord, but also a soldier of God. Faith shaped every part of his journey, from his earliest prayers to the solemn rites of knighting. Squires were expected to attend Mass daily, confess their sins regularly, and observe the holy calendar with devotion. Their days often began with prayer, and many carried relics or rosaries into battle. Victory was seen as divine favor, defeat a lesson in humility. Religious instruction taught more than scripture. It reinforced chivalric ideals: mercy, justice, sacrifice. Saints like Saint George, the Dragon Slayer, became models of courage and purity. Crusading knights were glorified as holy warriors, defenders of Christendom. Monks and chaplains often advised squires, guiding them through moral dilemmas and offering spiritual counsel. Before battle, knights knelt to receive blessings. Before knighthood, they kept vigil in prayer, often fasting and purifying themselves before donning the sword. Faith gave knighthood its deeper purpose. A knight wasn't merely fighting for land or king, but for eternal reward, divine justice, and the salvation of his soul. No amount of training could fully prepare a squire for the chaos of real war. But when the time came, he followed his knight into the fray, watching, serving, and learning what no practice yard could teach. At first, a squire's role in battle was support. He carried spare weapons, tended to wounded men, delivered urgent messages, and stood ready to rescue his knight if he fell. But often, the heat of combat left little time for waiting. Many squires were thrust into the fighting, too soon, too young. The clash of steel, the cries of dying men, the thunder of horses. War was loud, bloody and confusing. Lines broke, orders faded. All that remained was instinct and training. Those who survived gained more than scars. They returned hardened, sobered, and respected. Their valor on the field became their voice in court. Their wounds, proof of loyalty. Some faltered, others rose. Battle was the final forge. It stripped away ceremony and pride, revealing who truly had the heart of a knight. For a squire, it was terrifying, but it was also a chance to earn glory, prove his worth, and take the first real step toward knighthood. After years of tireless training, a squire who proved his courage, discipline, and honor was finally ready. The moment he had dreamed of since childhood had arrived, the sacred ceremony of knighthood. It began the night before. The squire bathed, confessed his sins, and fasted. Then he spent the night in solemn prayer beside his sword, keeping vigil in a chapel or great hall. It was a spiritual rite of purification, cleansing both body and soul before accepting the burdens of knighthood. The next day, dressed in white to symbolize purity, he was led before nobles, clergy, and fellow knights. His armor gleamed, his heart pounded. A noble lord, or sometimes even a king, would tap him lightly on the shoulder with a sword and speak the words, "In the name of God, Saint Michael, and Saint George, I dub thee knight." With that, the squire rose, no longer a servant, but a sworn warrior. He received his sword and spurs, symbols of his new duty. Cheers echoed, prayers were spoken, feasts followed. But beneath the glory lay a vow: to defend the weak, uphold justice, serve with loyalty, and live by the code he had trained for since boyhood. A knight's sword was not just a weapon, it was a sacred object, bound to his honor, his oath, and his soul. Receiving it was more than a gift, it was a solemn rite, a moment that defined his very purpose. On the day of knighting, the new knight took hold of his blade with reverence. Often blessed by a priest, the sword symbolized justice, courage, and divine duty. Its two edges reminded him to defend and to punish, to serve mercy and justice in equal measure. He swore an oath before all, to protect the weak, honor the king, never lie, and never flee from battle. These were not empty words, they were binding, both in life and in death. From that moment on, the knight carried his sword at his side as a constant reminder of those vows. To draw it was no light matter. To dishonor it was to disgrace one's name and family. Some swords were given names: Durandal, Excalibur, Joyeuse, each carrying legacy and legend. A knight's sword became part of his identity, etched with stories of courage and sacrifice. And when he died, it was often laid beside him, his truest companion in both glory and grave. For knights, glory wasn't won only on the battlefield. Tournaments offered a stage to display valor, skill, and honor without the bloodshed of war. They were dangerous, festive, and essential to a knight's reputation. Held in fields outside castle walls, tournaments attracted nobles from far and wide. Pavilions lined the grounds, trumpets sounded, and lords wagered on champions. For the knight, it was both sport and survival, a place to test his strength before a crowd of peers and monarchs. Events varied. The joust was the main spectacle, two armored knights charging with lances, seeking to unseat each other with a thunderous blow. But there were also melees, chaotic group combats where knights fought in teams, swinging swords and axes in a controlled frenzy. Victory brought more than cheers. Knights won gold, horses, or even the favor of highborn ladies. A single tournament win could raise a knight's fame overnight or end a career in a single misstep. But tournaments were also tests of character. Cheating was dishonorable, mercy was admired, and bravery, above all, was expected. A knight's life was not only forged in war, but also shaped by love and loyalty, especially toward the lady he served, admired, or swore to protect. Romanticized in songs and stories, the knight's devotion to a noblewoman became a pillar of chivalric culture. This ideal, known as courtly love, was both poetic and symbolic. A knight might dedicate his victories to a lady's honor, wear her ribbon during a tournament, or write verses in her praise. The relationship was often idealized, spiritual, more about admiration than possession. In reality, many knights married for alliances, not affection, yet love and loyalty still played powerful roles. A lady might serve as a knight's patron, offering him support at court or speaking in his defense. Her favor could lift his name or protect it. Chivalry demanded that a knight treat women with respect, defend them from harm, and act with grace in their presence. Failing in this duty could stain his honor more deeply than losing a duel. But love was also a trial. It tested restraint, dignity, and loyalty. And in a world where reputation was everything, how a knight honored a lady could echo louder than any battle cry. At the heart of knighthood lay a sacred bond, the oath of fealty. A knight did not fight for himself, he fought for his lord, the noble who granted him land, title, and purpose. This relationship formed the backbone of medieval society. When a squire was knighted, he swore loyalty on bended knee. Hands clasped, head bowed, he pledged to defend his lord's lands, enforce his justice, and ride at his call. In return, the lord offered protection, resources, and the right to govern a small piece of land, his fief. This oath wasn't symbolic, it was binding. To break it was treason. A knight was expected to ride to war at his lord's command, even against overwhelming odds. Loyalty could mean life or death. Yet the bond was mutual. A wise lord cared for his knights, offered counsel, and upheld their honor. In councils, he listened to their voices. In courts, he judged them fairly. Tensions sometimes rose when lords abused power or knights questioned orders. But in a well-ordered realm, the harmony between knight and lord was unshakable. For a knight, serving faithfully wasn't just duty, it was identity. His sword, his honor, his life, all belonged first to the one he had sworn to serve.